In this module, we're going to look at risk assessments on clients and risk assessments on buyers. It is something that I believe we need to do a special section on because it is something that is part of the customer due diligence process, is not generally carried out by estate agents, and it can be potentially a big problem for you if you don't. HMRC have made it clear in their guidance and in their reports and the penalties that they've issued that they expect you to have carried out a risk assessment on individuals to assess the risk of money laundering. And this is because if a person is a high risk of money laundering, then there is a good chance that they will be trying to hide their identity. And if they're trying to hide their identity, then you must do more to establish the identity of that individual. There's a lot of logic behind that, and of course, once you know whether your client is a high risk of money laundering or a low risk of money laundering, then you can take appropriate steps to identify them. If you look at the situation, then in theory, you should know enough about your client to be able to assess whether they're going to be involved in money laundering. And the level of customer due diligence you then undertake, whether that's simplified, normal or enhanced due diligence, will be easy for you to establish. And you will then be able to establish at an early stage whether you have to consider making a SARS report. So all in all, it's a very logical process to follow, but one that agents, as I've said, don't tend to follow. So let's look at some examples. You have a seller, and this seller is an owner-occupier. They're obviously going to be a low risk as far as money laundering is concerned. They're obviously not going to try and hide their identity. It will be a simple process to conduct your customer due diligence on those individuals. You then might have a landlord who's selling their rental property through an auction. They're going to be a higher risk because there is a good chance that the auctioneer will never get to meet that particular individual in person, so you end up with a higher risk of money laundering. Therefore, the level of customer due diligence steps you take to verify their identity must increase. And of course, you might get involved, if you're very lucky, in selling a property for a Russian government minister who wants to sell a £1 million property or a £5 million property. They're going to be the highest risk for you, and so they're potentially going to want to hide their identity. Therefore, you take additional steps to ensure that you understand exactly who they are and you verified their identity. When you're dealing with buyers, then of course, if you have a first-time buyer that has a 90% mortgage in principle offer from a bank, then they're going to be seen as low risk, not going to be hiding their identity. Very simple and straightforward. Again, you might have a landlord who wants to buy a property that he wants to rent out for cash. Again, he would be seen as a higher risk because you may not get to meet him in person, and he may want to disguise the fact that he's a landlord renting out a property. So therefore, you take greater steps to verify his identity. You might end up having an offshore trust that wants to spend £1 million or more on buying a property at auction. If they do that, then higher risk. People set those up for various reasons. So the levels that you have to take to identify that company and identify the people behind it end up being much greater than they would be for a first-time buyer. You should be able to confirm that you conducted a risk assessment if you were asked to do so. So HMRC will come along, they will want to see your risk assessment, they will then assess whether you've conducted the right level of customer due diligence. So make sure you've got that in place. Now, many agents don't do risk assessments. They simply carry out the same ID checks on customers every single time. That's not going to work for them. HMRC will find fault with their process and potentially issue penalties. Agents can do a manual risk assessment, and I know lots of agents that do just that. But it is time consuming, and it does mean that you've got to keep copies of evidence that you've done the risk assessment. But as you know now, there's a faster, easier and quicker way to do your risk assessments. You can use the app that's provided through Intelligent Compliance.